Good morning, Creative Life.
Good morning.
Danielle could not be with us in person this morning, so you have me doing the announcements. Getting them all backward and inside out. So, today is the conclusion of the first round of the Basics of Science of Mind talks, although we never really stray far from that. And the book we've been using is 10 Ideas That Make a Difference, and you can still get the free PDF of that from us. Next week begins a new series based on, loosely anyway, based on the book 30-Day Mental Diet by Willis Kinnear. So now I invite you just to relax. Not like you're all tense to start with, but you know, you're here, let the week go, just kind of be for a moment. Breathing in. You know a hack about breathing? If you breathe in twice, you know how when little kids are upset, they sniff like that? If you breathe in twice real quick through your nose and then exhale slowly through your mouth, well, don't take my word for it, just see what happens. A sense of peace kind of comes over you. It's a metabolic thing, so it's just relaxing into the now and here. There's a power and a presence and a beauty and a wonder, and it's brought us together for this day for a high and holy purpose. And even if we're not sure exactly what that purpose is, we know there is one. And it's going to unfold in its own perfect way, its own perfect time. Universal love enfolds me. Universal wisdom inspires me. Universal spirit enlightens me. Universal power encircles me. I am one, and all is well. As we begin this inner healing process, let me invite you to relax in quiet confidence, opening yourself to the miracle-working higher power. Now, symbolize the unity of your thinking and feeling nature by touching your chest with your right hand, letting my words act as your own for your own inner acceptance and receptivity. I acknowledge that there is a power, intelligence, and wisdom greater than my own. I am in the midst of it, and it is in the midst of me, sensitive and responsive to my every thought, word, action, and feeling. I now make this true for myself by saying aloud, I acknowledge. Acknowledging this higher power working through my life, I admit that I am personally responsible for solving my own problems, while being guided and assisted by something greater than myself. As I become ready to surrender the conflicts of my ego to the wisdom of this infinite presence, I simply speak these words, I surrender. I surrender. Knowing that forgiveness is the key to unconditional love and the feeling of heaven, I now unconditionally forgive anyone and everyone who has ever injured me in any way, real or imagined. And I now forgive myself for all my mistaken judgments and their resulting actions. From my deepest level of understanding, now I say, I forgive. Realizing that I continually experience the effects of my own thinking, I now choose to allow this higher power to recreate me deeply, filling my mind with thoughts that are only constructive, positive, loving, and beautiful. I call upon this divine inflow by stating aloud, I choose. I now center upon that one special idea that I'm willing to accept as real for me in this coming week. Visualizing this idea is already acted upon and brought to pass. In seeing my idea become a fact of my experience, I enjoy the happiness and peace of my thought fulfilled, and gratefully speak these words, I accept. Knowing that I have an everlasting place in the midst of the power that sustains all creation, as well as the support of all those around me, I allow myself to relax in the peace of fulfillment and gratitude and say, I release. Now in my mind's eye, I envision the presence of someone near and dear to me who has touched my life in powerful, wonderful ways. This could be a friend, a family member, a teacher of mine. It's someone who's not physically present with me in this room this morning, so I greet this being of light and consciousness, turning toward that face I see in my mind's eye and saying, I am grateful for the good in your life. Now I open my eyes to the world around me, turn joyfully to the people here, and greet each of them by saying, I'm grateful for the good in your life. All right. Good morning.
Good morning.
Well, it's Mardi Gras weekend, and there's a king cake out there. If you're new in the area, you're not sure what a king cake is, there's a whole body of lore behind it. There's a whole body of lore behind Mardi Gras generally. And I'm going to get to that because that was the plan, and then life gets in the way of plans. There's now a war in the world. And at the end of the service, Lisa's going to take us into prayer. There's some beautiful thoughts on our Facebook page. One is from Reverend Zemirah, who was a classmate of Reverend David's. And also yours?
Apparently I was her mentor.
Apparently you were her
Apparently
mentor?
I was her mentor.
And she's from that part of the world. I'm not sure exactly where. Poland, I think, but she grew up there, and their thoughts are up. And also I wanted to tell you that a number of our practitioners and ministers have written treatments that have been emailed to somebody who was on the panel paneling 12 new practitioners in Ukraine 3 weeks ago. We have a very active Centers for Spiritual Living ministry there. Those of you practitioners or no who want in on this, Jim, I'm looking at you because he emailed me. Send me something. Email me. You don't have to write a whole florid thing. A couple of us did because it's what we do. But you don't have to write a whole florid thing. You could just write a few statements of affirmation. And what I want you to know is these are going in country. This isn't just going to be circulated around, Harris County, Texas. These are actually going to Ukrainian people, many of whom are probably in the subway tunnels under Kyiv. So, wars are not started by foot soldiers. And so we bless and love combatants on both sides. No safety and peace for them and the civilians and the animals and everyone affected by this. And wars are started by greedy leaders. And you know what we do? We take them into our hearts too. Because in their pain and in their shame and in their greed, they're more like us than they aren't, because we all have these things. What we don't do is control the fates of millions of people. So today is about what we do control. Today is about the consciousness that we do inhabit here locally and personally, to get to the place in ourselves where we trust the universe enough to be at peace, to not have to make war in our minds. You might never pick up a weapon in form, but I bet you've picked them up plenty in mind. Right? Every time somebody does something stupid in the driving department, there's, right? The kind of the caveman part of us comes out, the fight or flight thing. So the science of mind is about healing the sense of separation from our source. This past week I was interviewed, and they asked me, they said, so let's start out with this. And they said, explain briefly. I'm not good at briefly, but explain briefly, right? To make a long story longer, right, Jim? Explain briefly the science of mind. Whoa, I haven't done that in a while, because I'm used to talking to people who have a passing acquaintance with it anyway, such as yourselves and those watching online here. You're here because you've heard of this. And every now and then we'll get somebody who's not only a newcomer, but they've never heard of any of this stuff. And that's really cool when that happens. But for the most part, it's It's building on information that you already have. So when they said, what is the science of mind? Brief. And I came back to something that used to be the slogan of Centers for Spiritual Living. I think when it was still, our part of it was still called the United Church of Religious Science, but it was that the science of mind is a philosophy, a faith, and a way of life. Okay? I like that, a philosophy, a faith, a way of life. And then you say a little bit about each of those three. It's a philosophy that says the universe is built to work, not to defeat us. It's a faith in that, which means that you lend your feeling to it. It's not just a head thing. It's not just an idea, but you give your feeling to it, that if the universe is built to work and not to defeat us, how do I feel about that? Is that okay with me? And what does that give me permission to do? And who does that give me permission to be? And then way of life is you take the first two and you go forward with them. And you deal with stuff. And you deal with stuff. The problems that come up, the pain that surfaces. See, when we do our spiritual work, and all faith systems know this, by the way, this is not exclusive to Science, Mind, or New Thought. When you do your prayer work, everything in you that says no to God tends to surface for the purpose of healing. In some other theologies, they call this your sinful nature, or your base nature, that kind of stuff. That's a little heavy for us. We'll just say it's issues. Our issues arise, okay? I have issues, people say. I have issues. What do we have issues with? Trust. We have major trust issues. We don't trust each other. We don't trust ourselves, and all of that harks back to we don't trust the universe as much as we could. So how do we develop that? Through spiritual practice. Through spiritual practice. No one does this perfectly all the time. No one does this. The great mystics of the ages, the great teachers that we've read, and founders of great schools, they didn't do it perfectly. Nobody on earth practices their religion perfectly all the time. Everybody forgets now and then. And that's okay, so we give ourselves permission that when the news gets to us and we feel sick to our stomachs about it, that's okay, and then we know what to do about that. We take spiritual Pepto-Bismol, okay? We go to the source of our own being where we're reminded that there's one life and one power and one presence, and it's right where we are, and it's right where everybody is who seems to be suffering right now on the planet. And that's the practice that we do. And you know what? That's why they call it practice. So we practice at it and we get better every time. Okay? Jeffrey Oshman gets up on this stage with that guitar and he'll say, and you say this pretty much every time, you say, well, I'm just learning, I'm not real good at this yet, I'm just learning and I'm just learning. And every time you're better and you're better. And you're never going to be perfect because no one is. The greatest musicians who've ever lived were still like, ooh, I could have done. When they finish, they're like, I could have, but you got it going on. Because you're practicing. And there's a moment, where you go from being some guy who's picked up a guitar to being a guitarist. And you know where that threshold is. And there's a moment where you go from somebody who's admiring spiritual practice to somebody who is a practitioner of spiritual work, with or without credentials. A license. All the license does is unleash you on the world to have a client base and work with them. But our aim here at Creative Life is to create a population of spiritual practitioners. The kind of people, and not just in this room, not just or in the venue that we have here, but where we're like, oh, I'm cool with all y'all because you're great and I know you and what fun and we get along and all this. But out there with those people, out there with those people, what could I think instead of this? What could I feel instead of this? What could I choose instead of this? How could I have peace in my heart instead of this? And when enough people do that, and a number of us have been saying this a really long time, when enough people do that, there's peace in the world. Because nobody wants war. Nobody wants war. Oh, we say some leaders do, because they can sit back. Well, it's problematic. But people think, leaders sometimes think there has to be war in order for them to get what they need to be reelected or make their people happy or make their people safe, and other people react a certain way. And we were talking about this during the Vietnam War. But wouldn't it be great if two leaders, you want to have a war, two of you get in a ring with gloves on. Okay? You duke it out. Leave the rest of us out of it. And I'm thinking, well, what if you had a large, strong leader and a smaller, not so strong leader? Then might would always win, and that doesn't seem just. So then thumb wrestling came up. It came up the other day because I challenged Jeffrey here to a wrestling match right here on the stage in honor of several wrestlers in the congregation, and we decided that was far too energetic, and so the idea of thumb wrestling came up, and I could take you, guitar and all. Mary I couldn't touch. You don't want to thumb wrestle with a harpist, let me tell you. But you see what I mean? There's another way to work stuff out. There's another way to work stuff out in this world besides the reptilian brain that jumps up and says, I'm going to kill you and eat you. There's another way to do things. Jesus Christ said, bless those who persecute you. Bless those who persecute you. Love your enemies. Love your enemies. Yeah, that was Jesus Christ. I mean, come on. That's too high a bar for the rest. Why do you suppose he said it? Why do you suppose it's been carried down the ages in the scriptures? Why do you suppose when you ask the general public what they know of what Jesus actually said, that tends to come front and center? That was like, love your enemies. He didn't say love your friends. He actually did. He said it elsewhere. But, you know, he said, loving your friends is easy. Blessing those who agree with you, super easy. But the people who seem to be against you, who seem to have a different agenda than your own, to do something with them, to take them into prayer, is quite a high calling. And that's what New Thought asks of us. And so this isn't a real easy teaching. Because we could get all whipped up into a frenzy about which side to take and stuff in this life, you know, and all be in agreement about that and like onward Christian soldiers sort of thing. That's not what Christ said to do. It's not what the great ones have said to do. The people I choose to follow who said, take it all into consciousness. It's all about oneness, or the forgetting of oneness, the denial of oneness out of our pain. So we've got work to do. And I say what we can control is our own consciousness. We don't move forces in millions, but something does. And a new intention introduced into the collective consciousness of the world, which is actually what I was planning to talk about today in detail, but will next week more, about the subconscious mind and the collective mind of the world and how all of that seems to work, you know. When you introduce an intention that's not only new and different, but is in accord with how things really are, how things seem to be not in accord with that, tend to fall into place behind the new idea. That is to say, love works and hate doesn't. Hate is self-consuming. It's self-destroying. If you don't believe me, try it for a while. Try resenting and hating and dwelling on misery and miserable people. And I'm not suggesting you do this, but this is an exercise, right? And think about all the people who, looking forward, looking back, look back at all the people who betrayed you and disappointed you and let you down and lied to you and stepped on you. And just as I'm saying this, people are probably pouring themselves coffee at home and stalking around the room, and you're all sitting there thinking, where is he going with this? Move on from this point, would you? Yeah, why? You feel the energy in the room change. Heart's beating. My heart. I'm making this stuff up, and my heart's beating a little faster, you know? I mean, this is all theory, and yet. And if I did that long enough, I could make myself sick. We could all do that together. Go out of here having had a miserable experience. Go home, have nightmares tonight. That's what consciousness can do. Hate consumes itself. Why doesn't it burn out altogether, you wonder? Well, unfortunately, the torch gets lit off the remains of those who have consumed themselves, and it gets passed on from generation to generation. That if only those people, those miserable people who are making all of these terrible choices would change. My life would be better. And suddenly there's this huge chasm of separation between me and my source that you stand in, that these others stand in. Lisa, I keep coming back to Lisa gave a talk now. It's been 2 years ago. There are no them. Or if you prefer, there are no they. There are no others. There's no opposing body out there that's cooking up trouble for you. Everybody's just doing the best they can given what they know, and some of them have forgotten who they are, just like we do. Just like we do. Maybe on a larger scale, but just like we do. Okay, well, so it's Mardi Gras weekend. And I wanted to tell you a little story that I tell, pretty much every third year when it comes to Mardi Gras weekend, because I like telling it. And I think it's useful and fun. And I'll be brief about it and send you to a documentary that Lisa's finding and putting in the chat. And I was introduced to this several different ways and several different times. It's about the Mardi Gras Indians. Mardi Gras Indians in New Orleans on Tuesday, far from the tourists, far from the crews, Krewe, who parade on floats and throw fancy dress balls and all of the doubloons and stuff that gets distributed and all of the riotous living and awash in alcohol. There live African American people in Treme in the 9th Ward, around principally all over the city, but ones I'm speaking of are principally around, I guess it would be north of Rampart and east of Esplanade, around the French Quarter, where the tourists tend to congregate. And the minute Mardi Gras was over last year, men were returning to their homes to start designing the costume they would wear on this Tuesday. Sewing by hand pearls, beads onto elaborate, enormous feathered costumes. With a crew, with a hierarchy in it, of people from the neighborhood, most of them men, all of them black, to enact on Mardi Gras Day, and also on St. Joseph's Day, which occurs later, but principally on Mardi Gras Day, to enact a ritual. They're called Mardi Gras Indians because they enact this ritual in commemoration of the First Nations people of the swamps of the South who took in escaped slaves from the plantations and harbored them and gave them safe passage. And these individuals in these Mardi Gras Indian tribes remember this and honor this with this work that they do. And so they each have a big chief. And he's the one with the big fancy costume, and the others have smaller, less fancy costumes, and lots of percussion. And on the morning of Mardi Gras, because this happens during the day, rather than the tourist stuff that's at night, every night for months leading up to it, they step out onto the stoop of their house, each of these men in these enormous costumes, and they begin to march, and they head down this street, and these come from here, and those come from over there, and those come from yonder, and they come to an intersection where the chiefs meet, usually by this time, the two principal chiefs of the wild Chapatulas and another tribe, I guess, and they meet, and they do kind of a war dance. And the drums are beating, and people are shouting, and everybody's excited. And probably a few tourists have shown up just because tourists do. You can't keep them away, right? So there's some people with out there filming all this. And the two chiefs head toward each other. And it gets louder and louder, and they're enraged, and it looks like they're going to do this terrible battle together. And they approach each other, and they clasp onto each other, and they whisper something to each other. And then they back away, and then the party kind of goes on, and then it presently dissolves. What do they say to each other? Well, no one knows for sure, unless you're one of them. You know, and it probably changes every time. But the word that's leaked out is that what they say to each other is not, I'm going to kill you. I have all power. You are my slave. No, what they say to each other is, looking good, baby. Isn't that awesome? Looking good. Beautiful, beautiful costume, you know. The fact that this is done in commemoration of some help that was given a long time ago tells you one thing, gives you one lesson, all of us one lesson in this. You've heard that awful saying that no good deed ever goes unpunished? Baloney, okay? No good deed ever goes unforgotten, ever goes unrewarded. Nothing that you've ever intended for anyone of a positive, beneficial nature has ever dwindled away to nothing. It is remembered. It is remembered. And here's the weird and cool thing. It's remembered by future generations. It's remembered by people who had no skin in the game, so to speak, the first time around. You do a solid for somebody else does one for you who knows nothing about the first thing that went down. Total strangers come into your life to do nice things for you, to give you a break, to be kind and generous and helpful, and maybe save your life. Or at least save your day. That's lesson number one out of it, is that so we pay this down the generations, this goodness and kindness. And the other thing I take away from it is just about conflict resolution. Let's outdress each other. Let's out-costume each other. Let's out-sing each other. You know? Let's outplay, like in the Damian Lillard quote I gave you last week, and Lisa put it up on the Facebook page about to outplay others in front of thousands. You first have to outwork yourself in front of nobody. Let's bring that. Let that be our spiritual warfare. Is I can love better. You know, I can forgive more. I can go deeper with this, and then you find there is no competition, because everybody's pulling together, just as the chiefs of these tribes are. They're pulling together. You know what's in it for them? A sense of community, a sense of perpetuity, a sense that this gets passed down to the younger generations, and that everyone keeps doing this and that no one ever forgets. And you know what else is in it for them? A good time, a fun time, a joyous time, gathering with the community to do great things. So I remain an optimist. And I was sharing with you last week, I said this center has been here since the Reagan administration, you know. And so we've seen a lot of stuff happen over the years. There have been a lot of Sundays we've come in here where there's been some trouble in the world. The Pulse nightclub shooting is one that I remember vividly, because it happened at 2 o'clock in the morning Eastern time, and we came in here and our phones had just lit up with it, and all of a sudden the subject changed, and we had to do what we have to do. Sometimes it's easy to be a religious scientist, sometimes it's not, but it's always worth it. And sometimes our work is harder to do, but it's still our work. It's still our work. So there is one life, one power, one presence. It's doing what needs to be done. Please keep the people of Ukraine and the people of Russia and everybody else in harm's way in your hearts and minds as we go forward. And we'll know that somehow a corner being turned in this conflict is going to change things going forward for all of us. For all of us. So I'm going to close now just by, and as I say, Lisa's going to come up and do a bang-on treatment about this, okay? Right? Yeah. And you do, you know. And you do, you know. One power, one presence, I feel it. And in a time of celebration, and it's also Go Texan weekend and the rodeo, and there's so much, their birthdays and anniversaries and exciting events in our lives. and there is a cloud of war, and there are hungry people, and it's cold outside. All of this can be so at once, because the one life is multifaceted. It includes each of us wherever we are. And I speak this word just in recognition of that oneness and wholeness and fullness is possible for each of us. There is something that we do control, and it's our thinking and feeling nature. We direct it along certain lines in conformity to the divine idea of peace, happiness, and well-being. And as we do this, things shift in our world and the larger world. A peace comes over us physically, psychologically, and is expressed now through our words and our actions. We become a place where peace shines through. And this idea catches on because it's a healthy thing. It's a life-giving thing. And others want in on it. And in this peace, there's music, and there's dance, and there's poetry. And in this peace, there's creativity, productivity, discovery, invention. In this peace, there's clarity and balance and calm. We love it here in this peace. And we let everything else just be, including that which has come before, commemorating it, yes, and with our emotional energy on today and the days to come, as though they already had, for this knowing and its manifestation in form. I am so deeply grateful. I release this word now into the infinite, calling it done, and so it is.
So it is.
You never know what happens here when you pick one of these things up. Flashbang. I'm sure most of you know that January is named after the Roman god Janus, the two-headed god. Maybe after what Jeffrey said this morning, we should be calling it Jeffuary. But before I forget, Mary Radspinner on the harp. Fantastic. Thank you. She's our board president. You just cannot keep her down. So as we come up to giving time, I just invite you to just, as Reverend Jesse was saying, just fill your hearts with gratitude. We have so many things to be grateful for. And when we're grateful, it really improves not only us, it improves the whole world. So I ask you to be generous in your donations. If you make your payments in other ways, fantastic. You can go online, you can pay them through PayPal. There'll be a link in the chat here. And obviously, our usher has made her way to the middle of the center today to start collecting. So please know with me now, divine love, through me, blesses and multiplies all the good I am and have, all the good I give and receive. I am prosperous now, and so it is.
Since he mentioned her, I figured I will just borrow Reverend Zemirah's words herself. Because if you go and look, there's a short blurb. There's a real pretty short blurb. You actually have to click on it to see the rest of the words. Reverend Zemirah is a staff minister at Mile High. She's a wonderful person. I mentored her a little bit. I didn't realize I was her mentor until one day she said I was, and I was like, oh, okay. Not that she needed a whole lot from me. And she just created an interfaith display at Mile High, so part of hers is interfaith. So I'm going to use her words. And it is titled, Prayers for Ukraine and for Peace in All Areas of Need in Our World. In this moment, we turn within to move deep into the silence of the heart, pausing to recognize God, Spirit, the Infinite One, this one mind, one heart of the universe that is the living Spirit, divine love. And feeling that river of love flowing in and through all that it is seen, all that it is not seen, knowing the essence of God is in all there is. And in this silence, we connect with the stillness at the center of the universal heart, immersing in love, the feeling of peace, the grace of spirit, right here in this moment. In this sanctuary of the highest, I know the people of Ukraine and Russia, their countries and leaders are wrapped, held, and surrounded in the depth of peace that is anchored so deeply and unwaveringly in spirit, held in the wholeness of divine. I know ultimate safety is always found in God. I know peaceful equanimity returns to and within their lands, their hearts, and the world. I pray and know their leaders, and all of the world's leaders are guided by God, inspired by wisdom, rooted in courageous action and decision-making for the peace and well-being of all the world. Each person in Ukraine and Russia is surrounded by the love of the world that is flowing in and around them now. And all fear and anxiety are released into this river of love. Peace is extended to every place on earth that is calling for it right now. Peace, grace, the Holy Spirit is revealed more and more, ever expanding within our awareness and within all the creation. Each beautiful human heart knows its ground of being in love eternal, and with this brings an embodiment and a sense of great well-being, a deep experience that is all well in God, in divine love. I am grateful for the truth of the living Spirit, which is always guiding, serving, manifesting, creating, and loving. Into this eternal law, I place this prayer with love, releasing and surrendering, and knowing it is unfolding in this moment now. I am so very grateful. Thank you, God. Thank you, Infinite One. And so it is. That is Reverend Zemirah Jazwierska. So if you're ever up in Mile High, please go throw a hug on her. She's a wonderful lady. And I wanted to use her words because they were so beautiful, and I wanted you to hear them. I wanted you to hear what is coming out of Holmes Institute. So before I release you into what is looking like it might be a beautiful day, one little bit, if you see the artwork back here in the corner, if you knew Marty and Bill, the artwork in the corner is Marty's. And so if you feel moved or called to any particular piece, please feel free to take it home. We want it to go to good, loving homes. And so is there a sign sheet so that you can mark off that you took it?
Yeah, there's a.
Okay, so there is somewhere to mark it off so that we know what that it has been taken to a loving home. And if you want to make a donation to the center, we would love that in exchange for the artwork. That would be great too. But we want the artwork to go to loving homes. So y'all take a nice deep breath. Know that you are a beloved child of God. Know that you will never look into the eyes of someone that God does not love. Know that love is all there is. And so it is.
Say with me now, something wonderful is happening through me.
Something wonderful is happening through me.
I feel it in my body.
I feel it in my body.
I feel it in my mind.
I feel it in my mind.
I feel it in everything I am.
I feel it in everything I am.
I choose it.
I choose it.
I trust it.
I trust it.
I use it.
I use it.
And what else? I love it.
Love it.
So it is.
And so it is.